South of Westeros and Assos, a large archipelago called the Summer Isles separates two warm seas, the Summer Sea and the Sunset Sea. The northernmost islands of the group have been mapped, 38 out of approximately 50 said to exist, but it is not known how far south the island chain extends. The mapped portion of the chain includes 3 large islands and numerous smaller ones. A man could walk across the smaller ones in an hour, but Chala, largest of the isles, stretches 200 leagues from tip to tip, containing green mountains and vast forests, steaming jungles and white and black sand beaches, roaring rivers filled with crocodiles, and fertile valleys. 2 of the valleys are settled. Red Flower Vale, that was the seat of Chalapharxo in the Summer Isles before he went into exile, and Sweet Lotus Vale, where the port city of Ebonhead is located. Valano and Omboru are each less than half as large as Chala, though either of the two is still larger than all of the stepstones combined. While Chala is the largest island, Valano is the most populous, as it contains 3 cities, Last Lament, with its great harbor, Sleepy Lotus Point, and Tall Trees Town, where priestesses carve histories and laws into the talking trees. These 3 islands are home to more than 9/10 of the Summer Islanders. The rest are scattered throughout the half a dozen of the smaller islands that are large enough to support sizable populations and prominently appear on maps. The Summer Islanders are black of hair and eye, ebony-skinned handsome people, tall, strong, graceful, and quick to learn. They speak their own language and often wear capes of brightly colored feathers. Flowers of 1,000 different sorts bloom on the Summer Isles, filling the air with their perfume. Myriads of brightly colored birds fly in between the fruit trees. Rainforests are full of spotted panthers larger than any lion and packs of lean red wolves. Monkeys swing through the branches of the trees above. Each of the 3 big islands contains its own native ape species. The old red man apes on Omboru, silver pelts in the mountains of Chala, and night stalkers on Valano. The Summer Isles have a long history dating back thousands of years. Much of this was recorded in carvings made by priestesses on the famous talking trees of Tall Trees Town. Even more is recorded in oral tradition because the Summer Islanders rely heavily upon histories recorded in highly complicated formal verse. The Summer Islanders lived in isolation from the rest of mankind, and they were apparently unaware that other lands even existed. Maps included in the ancient histories carved into the talking trees depict only the Summer Islands themselves, surrounded by a world-encompassing ocean. The first recorded contact between the Summer Isles and the outside world occurred between 8 and 5,000 years ago, when the Giscari Empire was at its height. A Giscari merchant ship was blown off course by a storm and landed on Valano, but the crew took the natives for demons with skins burned black by the fires of hell. Thus, later Giscari stayed away from the Demon Isle, as they named Valano on their charts. Although this was no real meeting, the contact had a profound impact upon the Summer Islanders, introducing to them the idea that there were other lands beyond their home waters. So as their curiosity was awakened, the princes of the Isles began building larger and sturdier ships capable of making long sea voyages. The greatest of these was Maltar-Xuk, prince of the smaller island of Kaj, who is remembered as Maltar the Windrider and Maltar the Mapmaker. A great new era of exploration and trade began. The Summer Islanders first encountered the peaceful inhabitants of Nav to their east, then the Basilisk Isles, and the northern coast of Sotorius as well as the southern coast of Assos and Westeros. Merchant ships from the Summer Islands may have reached Old Town generations before the Andals, or even the first man did. Some maesters speculated that Old Town may have first risen in the Dawn Age, as a trading post where ships from Valyria, Old Gis, and the Summer Isles would put in to replenish their supplies and trade with each other and even the elder races. Thousands of years later, famous traveler Lamas Longstrider, during his stay on Summer Isles, recorded that the sages of the Isles claimed that their ancestors once took the seas in oared coracles and enlargers with their ships with sails of woven hemp, and reached the shores of Sotorios and even founded cities there, but they were later overwhelmed and destroyed by the same forces that brought down later Valyrian and Giscari settlements there, particularly plagues, dangerous wildlife, and attacks by the savage brindled man of the interior. If these accounts are true, it was so long ago that no visible ruins of these settlements remain, their sites perhaps reclaimed by the jungles. Within less than half a century of their first contact, the Summer Islands had established a thriving trade network with the Valyrian freehold. Since the Summer Islands are poor in metals, but rich in gemstones, spices, hardwoods, and tropical animals highly valued by Valyrians, a busy trade routes were established between the two. A fashion developed amongst the dragon lords for monkeys, apes, panther cubs, and parrots, along with palm wine, fruit, and feathers. The Valyrians never made any attempt to conquer the Summer Islands though, probably because at the time Valyria was still an upstart power, fighting with the Giscari Empire to their east, and later they were focused on the conflict with the Rhoynar to their west. Yet it did not take long after establishing trade with the Valyrians for some princes of the Summer Islands to learn that the Dragon Lords would also offer them handsome payments of gold for slaves. Princes began to sell captured foes and defeated rivals to passing slavers. Summer Islanders soon became a favored target for slavers from Valyria, Old Gis, and the Basilisk Isles, as well as various pirates. Rapid coastal raids would carry off entire villages into bondage. Far more were sold into slavery by the princes of the isles themselves, fueling a round of internal wars in which each prince tried to capture more of their enemies to sell into slavery. For this reason, the histories carved into the talking trees refer to this time period as the Years of Shame, and it lasted for the better part of 2 centuries until a warrior woman named Xanda Ko, Princess of Sweet Lotus Vale, who had herself been enslaved for a time, united all the islands under her rule and made an end to it. Because iron was scarce and costly on the islands, armor was little known, and the long thrusting spears and short stabbing spears traditional amongst the Summer Islanders had proved of little worth against the steel swords and axes of the slavers. Xanda Ko armed her sailors with tall bows made of golden heart, a wood found only on Jhala and Omboru. These great bows far outranged the recurved bows of horn and sinew the slavers carried, and were capable of firing yard-long shafts of hardwood so forcefully that they would penetrate even the steel plate armor. Xanda Ko also had new large and sturdy ships designed, known as swan ships, for the long necks of their prows, to provide high platforms for archers to fire upon approaching slaver ships. Led by Xanda's daughter and eventual successor, Chatana Ko, known as Arrow of Chahar, Summer Islanders prevailed in what came to be known as the Slavers' Wars. Slavery has been strictly outlawed in the Summer Islands ever since. Unfortunately, Princess Chatanako's future was not so bright. She wed unwisely and did not reign as well as she had thought. The unity that the islands had known under Chatana and her mother did not survive her death. By the end of the wars, less than 3 centuries had passed since the Summer Islands had their first contact with the outside world. Given that the Giscari Empire was at its height when the first contact occurred, and Old Gis was destroyed by the Valyrians 5,000 years ago, Xanda and Chatana Ko must have lived at least that long ago. Yet, her and her mother's legacy lives. Slavers even now will flee at the sight of a swan ship, for each of those carry a complement of archers armed with golden hard bows. The bowmen of the Summer Isles are known as finest in the known world, and since the princes of the isles have forbidden the export of golden heart wood since the Slavers' Wars, none other bow can match those made in the Summer Isles, except for dragonbone bows, and those are exceedingly rare. Throughout their history to the present day, the Summer Islands have only been united under a single ruler about half a dozen times, and never for long. Instead, each of the smaller islands has its own ruler, each bearing a title translated into the common tongue as prince or princess. The 3 main islands are large enough to contain several rival princedoms. Summer Islanders are used to defending themselves, but they are not a warlike people, so their rulers have never set out on external conquests or taken part in foreign wars. For this reason, the islands do not prominently enter into the wider histories of wars in Westeros and Essos. Yet, rare internal wars do happen on the Summer Isles. Such wars are highly ritualized, with battles that resemble tourney melees, wherein bands of warriors meet on battlefields chosen in advance. They do not use golden hard bows in these fights, since their gods have forbidden that. Such wars seldom last longer than a day, and are harmless to everyone except the warriors themselves. Even the defeated princes suffer neither death nor disfigurement, though they must leave their homes and palaces to spend the remainder of their days in exile. Some years after Robert's rebellion, there was a civil war on Chala, which saw Prince Chalabharksa of the Red Flower Vale deposed. He sought refuge in King's Landing, and spent many years petitioning King Robert Baratheon for military assistance in retaking his homeland. Robert was attracted by the idea of invading the Summer Islands, but his advisors convinced him it was a foolhardy venture. Despite this negative response, Xo remains in exile in King's Landing and is constantly present at court. Summer Islanders prefer trade and exploration to conquest, so swan ships from the Summer Islands can be found in ports such as Old Town, King's Landing, Bravos, and Karf. Merchant ships from the rest of the world also visit the Summer Islands. Even Ibanese whaling ships from the far north of the Shivering Sea are known to put in at ports as far south as the Summer Isles. Numerous individual Summer Islanders have also set out for the wider world to seek their fortunes as mercenary bowmen and sell sails, some becoming pirates in the Basilisk Isles. Others have risen high among the sellsword companies in the disputed lands, as professional pit fighters in Slaver's Bay, and as guardsmen in their retinues of merchant princes in the Free Cities. One such sellsword captain was Xobar Chokwa, an exiled prince from the Summer Isles, who was one of the infamous Band of Nine during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. About 1,000 years ago, at the end of the last of the Rhoynish Wars, Princess Nymeria led the surviving Rhoynar in a voyage across the ocean to escape from the Valyrians. They did not immediately arrive in Dorne, as it is told in many stories. After briefly stopping in the Basilisk Isles and attempting to settle in Sotorios for almost a year, Nymeria and her followers fled once again due to the harsh local conditions. They wandered for another year and visited Naath, but later left due to the local butterfly disease. At this point, Nymeria and the remaining Rhoynar refugees tried to settle in the Summer Islands. The princes of the Isles refused to allow them to settle on any of the main free islands for fear of provoking the wrath of the Dragon Lords. Instead, Nymeria and her followers settled on the small desolate island Tabulu, located northeast of Valano. Because most of Nymeria's refugees were female, Abulu became known as the Isle of Women, a name it still bears. The island was already small, and its thin and stony soil could not possibly yield enough to feed them all, so many starved. Nymeria and her followers stayed on Abulu for 2 years, but hunger, disease, and slavery rates continued to take their toll. Ultimately, she chose to set out once again with her people to find a new home, and sailing north, they landed in Dorne. Several thousand of her followers chose to stay, however, and their descendants have lived on the Isle of Women up to the present day. There are some smaller isles worthy of mention. The Singing Stones have jagged peaks so riddled with holes and airways that they make a strange music when the wind blows. The people of the stones can tell which way the wind is blowing from the sound of their song. Stonehead is plainly the work of men. The north face of the rock has been carved in the likeness of some forgotten god. His look is the last that the Summer Islanders see as they sail north to Westeros. Kaj, once home to Malthar the Mapmaker, still boasts the finest shipyards in the archipelago. Most of the islanders' famed swan ships are built on Kaj, and the Pearl Palace, seat of the Princes of Kaj, is renowned for its collection of charts and maps. Though many gods are honored on the Summer Isles, a special reverence is shown to the god and goddess of love, beauty, and fertility. By joining together in the act of worship, men and women give honor to the gods who made them. All Summer Islanders, no matter rich or poor, male or female, of high birth or low, are expected to dwell for a time in the temples of love, sharing their bodies. Most serve the gods in the temple for no more than a year, but those deemed the best in their serving remain. In other lands they might be called whores or courtesans, but on the Summer Islands they are called priests. Fearless mariners, crews of the swan ships explore new horizons endlessly. There are indications that explorers from Summer Islands may have mapped the western coast of Sotorios to the very bottom of the world, but hid it from the rest of the known world. If they did so, then maybe they had a reason, since Summer Islanders are an overall peaceful nation. Maybe they got scared, or greedy, thus they decided to keep that information to themselves. Or maybe these indications are nothing but fantasies, and all of the explorers simply did not return from their voyages. Only the princes of the Summer Islands and the crews of the explorers' ships may know the truth, but they remain silent. Thank you for watching. See ya!